How can you budget like a Zen master without tracking every dime you spend? How do you budget for oddball expenses that pop up from time to time? And how can you tell just how risky a bond mutual fund is? We'll answer these questions and more on this, the 56th episode of the DoughRoller Podcast. I said of the DoughRoller Podcast. Thank you.
Welcome to the DoughRoller Podcast, where the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. We help you make more, spend less, and invest the rest. And now your host, Rob Berger.
Whether you're just starting out, buried under a mountain of debt, or well on your way to financial freedom, this is the podcast to help you take your finances to the next level. You know, it used to be when I started this podcast, a little blooper like that. I hit the wrong button. I was trying to do this.
Welcome to...
And instead I did this, which of course is nothing. I used to edit all that out. You know, life is just too short. Nothing's perfect. I'm not perfect. I keep it in the show. Why not? Occasionally I'll edit something out if it's just really, really bad. I even on one old episode, I think if you listen to all the shows and you listen to the very end, I think on one I actually put at the very end some of my bloopers from recording that show. Maybe I ought to start doing that again. Anyway, hey, welcome to the 56th episode of the DoughRoller Podcast. I'm Rob Berger. I am your host. And today is really packed full. I actually thought about, should I break this up into 2 or even 3 podcasts? But nah, I'm going to put it all in on one. And I'm going to cover a couple of emails from readers for the money tool and money tip of the day. And for the main part of the podcast, the main part of the show, we're going to talk about ways to budget like a Zen master. I'm not sure really what the Zen master thing has to do with it. I just thought it was a cool title, so there you go. And that's come up because I spent the weekend in YNAB. You need a budget. That's the tool I use to budget. You may use something else, but just going over our budget and working on a number of different things. I think part of it was because it's, I'm recording this in the middle of April, and so it's tax time, and that got me focused on our budget. So that's what we're going to talk about for the main part of the show. But before we jump into the show, a couple of quick housekeeping items. The first is we're in the month of April and 2014, and I'm really looking for some honest feedback about this show. So if you can take a few minutes, go to iTunes, leave me an honest rating and review of the show. And then if you do, just shoot me an email at dr@doughroller.net. You'll be entered to win a $100 Amazon gift card that I'll just draw randomly from those that email me at the end of the month. Again, I'm looking for an honest rating and review of the show so that I can make it a better show. I can improve it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, hey, if you haven't connected yet on Facebook, you can find the DoughRoller Facebook page at doughroller.net let me try that again, facebook.com/DoughRoller. And, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with Facebook. I'm not a huge Facebook user personally, but for DoughRoller, what I tend to do is post sort of inspirational quotes. I ask some questions. I'll post a link to an article every now and again. I don't tend to get too deep on like investing topics and whatnot. That folks, when folks are on Facebook, they're not usually wanting to dive deep into bond durations and how interest rates affect the value of bonds, which is our money tip of the day. So it's usually lighter content, but if you want to connect on Facebook, that's how you do it, facebook.com/DoughRoller. Okay, for the money tip of the day, the money tool of the day, this actually comes from a reader. They asked me a question. His name is Dan. Let me read you the question, and then I'll tell you what tool I recommended that Dan use. So Dan wrote in, he said, "Hi, Rob, I've been looking on the internet for free bill manager programs. Yes, I am cheap, but I was wondering if you have any to suggest. Currently, I do all my banking online with my credit union. However, I do have bills I pay and spend at least 4 or 5 days a week to maintain a known balance in the account. This isn't to say I overspend. I just hate being late with a bill and like to be up to date on pocket cash. Yes, I even allow myself a little spending cash. Any input would be great. Dan." Dan, thanks for the question. That is a good one, and I have the perfect tool, one that I've used. And to your question, it's free, totally free. So, you can't beat that. And it's called Manila. Very easy tool to use. And let me just kind of run down briefly how the tool works. So you sign up for an account with Manila. And if you want to get to their sort of main page, you can go to doughroller.net/paymybills. All one word, doughroller.net/paymybills. That will redirect you to Manila where you can sign up. And so what you do with Manila is you link all of your accounts. And by accounts, we're talking about your bills. So literally, Manila supports a ton of different businesses. We'll talk about them in a minute. But you link your various bills to your Manila account. And then what Manila will do is notify you when your bills come due. And of course, you get notice ahead of time. So, when I've used it in the past, for example, it would send me an email a few days before my cell phone bill was due. And it not only sends you an email reminding you that the bill is due, but it's actually connected to in this case, your cell phone provider. So it knows, exactly the due date and how much you owe. And I can tell you that on a number of occasions, it's helped me avoid a late payment when I've gotten that email. So that's sort of at a high level what Manila does. Now, one of the great things is it supports I think the number now is over 4,000 businesses. So you can link your credit cards, you can link wireless carriers, you can link your banks and utilities. If you have magazines or even a Netflix subscription, you can link those as well. And so it's got a lot of coverage. I mean, I don't think there's a single sort of monthly bill that I have that I can't link to Manila. The other thing it does is it actually allows you to link your loyalty programs as well. So if you're a member of various airline programs, miles programs, or hotel or car lease loyalty programs, you can link all of those as well, and it will track your whatever it is, miles or points for each of those programs, which is a great feature. And as part of that, you can even link online coupon sites, Groupon and Living Social. And I have to confess, I've never bought anything on Groupon or Living Social. I know our son has, maybe you have too, but apparently you buy these deals and then eventually they expire, I'm told. And if you have experience with Groupon and Living Social, perhaps you'll know better than I, but I think they expire, and so that you can track all of that. The other thing that I find very useful with Manila is you can connect your healthcare accounts. And dealing with insurance is just a hassle, and you're getting these EOBs, explanation of benefits, and trying to track all this stuff. You can connect your accounts if you're with Aetna, Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, Cigna, or Humana. I suspect they'll add more over time. I think those are the ones they have now. But you can connect your healthcare accounts to Manila. Manila has a free mobile app, whether you're on an iPhone, iOS operating system, or if you have an Android phone, they have a free mobile app that you can use to keep track of all this stuff. And then finally, they have what they call bill share. So you can share your bills with family members. Say you have a spouse or significant other. Of course, they could log in and get their own account, or you could just share the information with them. Maybe you have friends, maybe you have a roommate, and you're sharing some payments on utilities or bills or whatnot. You can share that information with a roommate. You could even share it with an accountant if you have an accountant that needs access to your information. So it has that feature as well. And as I said, it's free. Again, you can check it out at DoughRoller.net/paymybills. So that's the money tip of the day. And that brings us to the main topic for today's show, and that is 7 ways to budget like a Zen master. And as I said, this has been front and center in my mind as I have refocused on our budget. I kind of go hot and cold with budgeting. I'll go months without budgeting. And I always regret it when I do that. So this weekend, I fired up my copy of YNAB. I think they're on version 4. And I have this 27-inch monitor, mainly because of blogging. But so that's nice for budgeting because I can look at any one time. I'm looking at my YNAB account now, and I can look at, 3, 6, 8 months worth of budgets all on one screen. And so I've been YNABing this past weekend, and that's got me focused on budgeting, and not just budgeting generally and how I'm doing, but how I want to budget and how I want to have an effective budget. And so I thought today I would share with you 7 tips. Again, 7 ways to budget like a Zen master. 7 tips that kind of guide my approach to budgeting. Hopefully they'll be helpful to you, and of course maybe you'll have others. And if you do, shoot me an email. Always love to hear great tips on how to manage our money. So, don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have some other ideas. But here are my 7. So the first one, and I think in some ways this is the most important, and that is you've got to begin with the end in mind. You have to understand why you are budgeting. And if you understand why you're budgeting, it will answer a lot of questions that will come up during the budgeting process. For example, how many categories should you track? What should you track? What tools should you use, if any? I use YNAB. You may use Mint.com. That's a good one. Quicken. You may use a pad of paper and a pencil or Excel. But why are you budgeting? What is your goal? For us, and I think for probably most people, it's simple. Control our spending. That is our goal. And to do that, I need a couple of things. One is I need to understand where my money is going, at least to a point. I don't think I have to track every single dime and to know exactly where it's going. But I do have to have a good enough idea. But again, I always think back to, well, what's my goal? Control my spending. So I need to have enough detail that it enables me to control my spending. And then I need to understand how much money I have to spend. For me, it's not good enough to just check out my budget once a month. I need to have a good idea of where I stand in the middle of the month as I make spending decisions. Now, let me give you an example of this, particularly with this understanding where my money is going, but to a point. How do you budget one-off expenses? You ever encounter that? You're working on your budget and you've downloaded your checking account transactions or your credit card transactions, and an expense comes in and it's just an oddball expense. This happened to me this weekend where we had to renew our car registration. Now that's for us, it's actually not an annual expense because in Virginia you can renew for 2 years at a time. So this is an expense that comes up once every 2 years. But I was kind of surprised at how much it was. It was $134 each year. So I just spent $260 to renew my license plate on my Camry for 2 years. How do I deal with that? That's not an insignificant expense, but it's only going to come up once every 2 years. That's one example. The other example was postage. We don't spend a lot at the post office. We buy stamps. Pretty much is about it. But this month we had we had to send out some packages, very unusual. I spent almost $100 at the post office. So, do I want a separate car registration fee category? Do I want a separate, post office fee category? Well, I could do that. And maybe if you have a lot of expenses in one of these categories, that might be right for you. But for me, I don't. And I want to keep this, I want to, again, begin with the end in mind. How do I control my spending? So what I did was, for the postage fees, I just have a generic fees category. And in that go a lot of different things. As an attorney, I have fees related to my practice of law. I have, of course, in this case, we wouldn't really think of postage necessarily as a fee, but I lump that in there. We pay, I think it's $25 a year for our dog for a pet license fee. You have these sort of oddball fees that come up. I don't need to track each one individually. It's good enough to just put it in a generic category that I just call fees. And if I ever need to drill down into exactly what I spent for a given month, I can. But for the most part, I don't have to. It's not a huge number. And so that's what I did with the postage. I just put it in the fees category, knowing that it's, years could go by and we're not going to spend that much at the post office again. And so that was fine. I can still meet my budgeting goals. For the car registration fee, what I decided to do there was to actually have a category for car expenses. And the reason I did that, there's sort of car repairs. That's something you might budget for sort of in a rainy day fund. That's different. But monthly, they're just different sort of small expenses that come up with a car. Not only is there a registration fee, you have to renew your license. In Virginia, we have a state inspection every year. You have to get an emissions inspection, I think, every 2 years. And these fees actually add up enough that they matter. And I wanted to track just how much our car was costing us above and beyond the periodic repairs that come up. So I created a separate category for that. That made sense for me. I could end up changing it. If it turns out that that category doesn't work for me, I'll lump it into, I could lump it into the car repair category and budget for it like we do our sort of periodic expenses. But that's what we did. But again, the whole thing I'm always asking myself is, why am I budgeting? I want to control my spending. Okay, then do I need to control my spending at the post office? For me, the answer is no. Maybe for you, the answer is yes. But for me, it's not. But for car registration fees, we've got 3 cars, which I really want to reduce that number, but that's a topic for another day. That was a big enough item. I wanted to track it separately. All right. That kind of leads nicely into point number 2, and that is, whatever you do, keep it simple. How many categories do you really need? The fewer the categories, the better. For example, when I look at my categories, if we're not spending at least $100 in a category each month, I'm wondering, why have I separated this out? Now, for you, the number could be smaller. Maybe you need to track down to $50. Or maybe for you, the number is a lot higher. Maybe you don't need to worry about anything under $250 or $500. We're all different, right? We all have different incomes, different expenses. But whatever the number is for you, when you see a category that's consistently, maybe only costing you $20 or $30 a month, you may be able to roll that into another category, reduce the number of categories you have, and combine them, and just make it simpler. So, as an example, I combine into one category our phone, internet, and cable. Now that makes sense because we have a bundled package right now, but I don't need to separate out the home phone versus the internet versus the cable. I could, but I just don't need to. It doesn't help me achieve my goals for budgeting, so I can combine those. On the other hand, I do keep our cell phone separate. 1, because it's much more expensive, and 2, I'm currently on the warpath of getting that cell phone bill down, and so I want to keep it separate. But the key is to keep your budget simple. And let me give you a tip on one thing that I do that helps me with this, and I call it budgeting by the store. Budget by store. You ever you buy something at the Home Depot. How do you categorize that? It's probably home maintenance, but not necessarily. Or a better example might be at a pharmacy, a CVS, or a Walgreens. You may go there, you may get a prescription, so that's medical. Or you may buy groceries. I mean, they have food in most of the larger CVSs, so you might get milk and food. That's a whole different category. And you see a cost come in from maybe your spouse spent some money, spent $100 at the CVS, and you're like, I got to figure out, is this groceries? Is this household items? Was this a prescription? And so you're talking to them, trying to, do you have the receipt? Can I break it down? To me, it's just too much effort, and it doesn't help me achieve my goals. So I budget by store. So, for example, for all CVS's, any pharmacy, whether it's a Walgreens or Rite Aid, I just have one category for all expenses. I call it pharma, short for pharmacy. Yes, not everything we buy at this store technically is a prescription. We might buy a household good, or we might buy food, or we might buy a gift for someone. But what I found is the expenses that we incur at the CVS or Walgreens or Rite Aid on a monthly basis isn't so significant that I can't just record it all as pharma, and I know what that means. And if I want to drill down one month into that category and see why we spent more than normal, I can do that. But it makes the budgeting much, much easier. I do the same thing with Home Depot and Lowe's. That all goes into a home maintenance category. And I do the same thing with grocery stores. Not everything you buy at a grocery stores is groceries. But that's where it goes. And so you might want to try that out. I find that it doesn't hurt my ability to control my spending, which is my ultimate goal for the budget. So I budget by store, and that makes things a lot easier. The third tip, have master categories. And this is easy in YNAB because they have master categories by default. But the two big ones for me are fixed monthly bills, which would include rent, phone, internet, cable, electricity, all of your utilities, and things like that, a gym membership, and so forth. And then everyday expenses, which would be groceries, gas for the car, spending money, restaurants, clothing. And that helps me break out my budget. I really want to focus on fixed monthly bills separately from everyday expenses, because the way I control my spending in those two big categories is different. If you've listened to my podcast on what I call the one and done method of saving money, and let me look up the podcast number just in case you've not listened to that one. Here we go. It's podcast 13, DoughRoller.net/podcast13. It's the one and done method of saving money. You can check it out, but that generally applies to fixed monthly bills. And so I look at my fixed monthly bills and I'm asking myself, okay, how can I lower these expenses? What changes can I make to my phone, internet, and cable package, for example, to lower the cost? How can I bring my cell phone bill down? And so I'm asking different questions there. For everyday expenses, the questions I'm asking are different. Do we really need to spend that much money eating out? Why do we spend so much on groceries? Can we get better deals? The difference is the approaches are a little different, and so that's why I like to have master categories for my budget. So I have, just in my case, I have just a couple of master categories. I have a giving category where we give money to our church and other charities. I have the fixed monthly bills. I have everyday expenses. I have what I call a rainy day fund. That's basically all of my periodic expenses like gifts, life insurance, car repairs. And then I have some saving goals. And so that's it. Those are my main. In some ways, I could look at my budget just at that level. Now, again, I drill down obviously into subcategories, but I think using master categories to organize your budget can be very helpful. Okay, the fourth tip is use your credit card or your debit card, if that's what you choose, for your expenses as much as possible, because it just makes tracking your spending so much easier. In YNAB, I download all of our credit card and checking account transactions, upload them into YNAB. It takes just a couple of seconds. I then go in and categorize the spending, much of which is automated at this point in YNAB. And it's very simple. If you spend a lot with cash, then you just got to track your receipts, and it's just a lot more time-consuming. For me, it's a headache. Now, I know some people want to spend cash. That's fine if that's your choice. But I find that using plastic is more, it's got security. I earn rewards from the credit card charges, and it's just much easier to track. Now, quick tip here, how do you deal with ATM withdrawals? You get that, you're trying to do the budget, you see that your significant other took out $100 a week ago, and you're like, how did you spend it? I need you to break out the expense, and if I did that to my wife, she'd just look at me. I mean, I wouldn't get a reasonable answer from her. So I see 25 years of marriage has taught me something. I don't ask her. Truth is, I probably take out more from the ATM than she does anyway. Honey, I hope you're not listening to this podcast. So what I do is I just have a category for spending money. And when we take out money from an ATM, it just goes into the spending money category. And I don't track it dollar for dollar. Now, that works for us because we don't have a lot of ATM withdrawals. If you do, then you're going to probably want to track it more closely. But for me, it's just a hassle. We keep the amount of cash we carry around to a limit, and don't take out a lot of ATM withdrawals. And when we do, I just put it in a spending money category, and it makes it easy. Again, go back to the first point. What's your goal? Ours is to control the spending. We don't take out enough from ATMs to have to worry about it. We can control our spending without tracking every single dime. Okay, the fifth tip is really important, and this is how you deal. I call it master your card. How do you deal with your credit cards and your budget? And I kind of want to make 3 points here in this because this is important, dealing with your credit cards. The first is when you set up a budget. Let's say you've got a lot of credit card debt that you're trying to pay off. You haven't been able to pay off all of your credit cards on a monthly basis, and you've got $5,000 in credit card debt. For that, I list it as a budget item. That's debt. I list it as a budget item, and each month I allocate a certain amount to that item, just like I would my rent, mortgage, phone, whatever. In YNAB, they actually call it pre-YNAB debt, the debt on your credit card before you started using YNAB. And it's a budget item, no different than any other. Now, that's for sort of existing credit card debt that you're trying to pay off. Now, then you say, well, but what about your future use of a credit card? As you spend to buy gas and groceries, how do you deal with that? For that, I treat a credit card just like I do my checking account. I download my transactions from my credit card company, very easy to do, upload them into YNAB, and I categorize them. Whatever I've used that credit card for, whether it's to buy gas or groceries or whatever, I put it in the correct category. Now, what's interesting about that is my budget then will show that I'm spending money, right? As I allocate a credit card purchase to, again, whatever category it might be. However, I've yet to spend any money out of my checking account. So what happens when it comes time to pay that credit card bill? It's actually, that payment is not a budget item. It's simply a transfer from my checking account to my credit card bill. I don't have to put that payment into a budget category because I've already budgeted each of the transactions that make up my credit card bill as I've incurred them. Again, very easy to do in YNAB. You just download the transactions from your credit card company. I use Capital One, and it's very easy to do, and upload them into YNAB. Now, that sort of brings me to the third point, and that is when you start a budget, you're probably going to have a little bit of both, right? You're probably, even if you pay your credit card bill off in full every month, at any point in time, you're going to have a certain balance on that card. And then, of course, you're going to continue to use the card. So how do you deal with that in your budget? Well, what I do, and this is what YNAB does, is when you set up your budget for the first time, take whatever your existing balance is. Doesn't matter if you're setting it up on the first of the month or in the middle of the month, whatever your current balance is, and classify that as debt. And that's debt, even if you're going to pay it off in full in a week. That's debt. It's a budget item. When you pay that bill, that debt, you're going to record that as a budget item, paying the credit card. And eventually that debt, of course, is going to be gone. And then as you continue to use the card for your monthly expenses, that gets budgeted just like no different than if you used an ATM or debit card. Again, you'll download your transactions, upload them into your budgeting software, and categorize those expenses as you would the use of a debit card. And then when it comes time to pay your credit card bill, it's not a budget. Doesn't affect the actual payment of your credit card doesn't affect your budget. It's simply a transfer from one of your accounts, checking account, to another account, credit card. Once you wrap your mind around this, and it took me a while to do that, it actually makes dealing with credit cards very simple. I hope I've explained it well, but here's a tip. YNAB, whether you use it or not, has some great video tutorials on how to deal with credit cards. I will leave links to them in the show notes. They will explain it. I think just visually it's maybe easier to follow, and they're great tutorials if you want to check them out. Again, I'll leave links to those in the show notes. Okay, periodic expenses. I've touched on this. I call them my rainy day fund. But you've got a budget for your periodic expenses. For most, this would include insurance. Car insurance, you typically pay twice a year. Life insurance, we pay once a year. You're going to have eventual car repairs that come up that you need a budget for. Home repairs if you own a home. Gifts, at Christmas or other holidays, anniversaries, birthdays. And of course, travel, planning for that vacation. It's important to set aside money for each of these every month. And that will build up over time, of course. Some people leave that cash in their checking account. If that's too much of a temptation for you, you can move it to a savings account. But here's the thing. Your budget should be guiding what you spend and what you have to spend, not your checking account balance. And that's a hard transition to make sometimes. But I think if you make that transition, it will help you a lot. But again, it's fine to take this money and put it in a savings account, earn a little bit in interest anyway. But you've got to budget for those periodic expenses. If not, the car insurance bill is going to surprise you. It used to surprise me it came the same time twice a year, but it still shocked me. So setting aside money for these periodic expenses is critical. Okay, the seventh and final way to budget like a Zen master is this. Review your budget at least weekly. Again, there's no one size fits all. Some people may not have to do that. But I think for me, I've got to be looking at my budget weekly to understand where my money is going, how much I have left to spend for that month. It really, probably more than as much as anything. Going back to the first point that I mentioned, control my spending. That's my goal for budgeting. Reviewing the budget weekly helps me do that as much as anything. And again, with YNAB, it's easy. With Mint.com, it's easy. Quicken, it's easy. But even if you use an Excel spreadsheet, whatever your budgeting tool of choice is, I think it's important to review that budget at least weekly. And that's what I do now, and it helps a lot to control the spending. So those are the seven ways to budget like a Zen master. I'm sure there are others. If you have other tips, please share them with me. I'd love to get new tips, and a lot of them I'll share in future podcasts. So shoot me an email at dr@DoughRoller.net if you have a budgeting tip that you think others would benefit from. Okay, on to the money tip of the day, and this comes from a reader question that I answered not long ago, and I thought it's something I'd share on the show. It's a little technical as it relates to bond funds, but I think actually it's a really important thing to understand, and it has to do with how interest rates affect the value of a bond mutual fund. And you say, well, what if I've got a bond mutual fund, and let's say the average duration is 5 years, which means basically it means, not exactly, but basically it means the fund invests in bonds that have maturities of 5 years. That's not actually technically correct, but it's close enough for our purposes. So it's a 5-year maturity or duration of this bond fund, and interest rates go up 1%. What will happen to the value of that bond mutual fund? Will it go up? I mean, interest rates go up, so I guess the value of the fund will go up, right? Or I don't know, maybe will they go down? And how much? Well, there's a very easy way to figure this out. Now, here, let me first read the question. It comes from a reader named Mike, and then I'll tell you how to figure this all out. Trust me, it's very easy. Here we go. Rob, I listened to all your podcasts. Thanks for your tips and advice. I especially like DoughRoller on asset allocation. And by the way, you can check that out at DoughRoller.net/podcast46. Mike goes on, my investing is at a point where I need to increase my bond allocation, but I don't want to lose value when interest rates rise. I also want to avoid treasuries due to their volatility. So I'm looking for short-term bond investments that will be less sensitive to rising interest rates and that are investment grade. CSJ is one bond investment I'm considering. What do you think of CSJ, and do you know of others that fit this category? Mike. Well, first, Mike, thank you for the question. It's a great one. And I've already responded to Mike's question in an email and gave him some ideas on bond investments. But let's talk about how interest rates affect the value of a bond fund and how you can figure out specifically to your whatever bond fund you invest in, how interest rates will affect its value. And I'm actually going to use the bond fund he mentioned, which when he emailed me, I had never heard of, ticker symbol CSJ. And so we'll kind of, it'll be a nice thing. We'll actually look at a couple of different things here. So first of all, as interest rates go up, the value of a bond mutual fund goes down. They say, well, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, aren't I earning more interest on these bonds as rates go up? No. There are some what we'll call variable rate bonds, and they're actually becoming more prevalent now. But for the most part, bonds have fixed interest rates. Think of a mortgage. Most mortgages are variable rate mortgages, but I think probably a little more common are the fixed rate mortgages, 30-year mortgages, 15-year mortgages. And the same is true with bonds. Most bonds have fixed interest rates or yields. And so imagine you have a 5-year bond. It's going to mature in 5 years, and it's paying, we'll say 2%. That's your interest rate when you bought the bond. So each year you get 2% of your $5,000. At the end of the 5th year, you'll get your interest rate for year 5, plus you'll get your money back. Let's say you invested whatever, $10,000. You'll get your $10,000 back at the end of 5 years. So you've got your bond, you're happy, and you're getting your 2%, and then tomorrow interest rates go up to 3%. And you think, man, 3% is better than 2%. So my interest rate's fixed. It's not variable, so I'm still stuck at 2%. I think I'll sell this bond to somebody and go out and buy a new bond at 3%. I'll earn 1% more, right? Well, who's going to buy your 2% bond? I mean, I wouldn't, right? Because why would I buy your bond? I can go get a new bond at 3%. And this is really the key. You think, well, you're right. Who would buy my 2% bond? If I want to sell my bond, I got to discount it. I've got to reduce the price to make up for that 1% interest rate difference in order to encourage someone to buy my bond. And that's why rising rates cause the value of existing bonds to go down. And for that matter, the reverse is true as well. If interest rates were to fall, imagine your 2% bond and interest rates fell to 1%. Now you're looking pretty smart, right? You don't want to sell your bond. You're earning 1% more than everybody else. And if you did sell your bond, you'd say, hey, I want a premium because you're getting a better interest rate than what's currently available. So as a general rule, rising interest rates cause existing bond and bond funds their value to go down. Falling interest rates cause existing bond and bond mutual funds, their value to go up, okay? Now, the question then is, but by how much? And that's the point of today's money tip of the day. How do you figure out how interest rates will affect the specific bond mutual fund or ETF that you invest in? It's real easy. The key is to understand the bond fund's duration. And again, I'm not going to get into the technical differences between duration and maturity. There are differences. I do plan to do a bond fund series. I know, exciting, right? Well, it's exciting to me, probably not to most of you, but I am going to do that. I've got that on my to-do list, but not right now. But basically, we'll think of duration as how long until the bonds in that mutual fund mature, come due. It's not quite technically correct, but for our purposes, it's fine. And so what we need to do is you need to figure out the duration of your bond fund. How do you do that? Well, we're going to use the CSJ, the bond ETF that Mike mentioned, and go to one of my favorite tools, I've talked about it many times, is Morningstar. Type in the ticker, CSJ, in the quote box at the top, and that brings up this ETF, and it turns out it's from iShares, and it's the 1 to 3 year credit bond fund. And it gives you, of course, Morningstar gives you a ton of information. If you scroll down the page on the right-hand side, you'll see something called the style map. And it will tell you the average effective, it's EFF, average effective duration. In this case, it's 2 years, 1.93 years. But we'll just round up and say the duration is 2 years. Okay, great. You're saying, great, Rob, got it. Duration for this fund is 2 years. You've also told me how I can find the duration on any of my bond mutual funds. Great. Thank you so much. What good does it do me? Well, here's how duration works. If all other things being equal, if interest rates were to rise by 1%, the value of a bond, ETF, or mutual fund would go down by 1% equal to its duration. I know, it's early. It's early as I'm recording this. Did you follow all that? Let me try it again. If interest rates go up by 1%, the value of a bond fund or ETF will go down by a percentage equal to its duration. So in this case, for an ETF, bond ETF with duration of 2 years, if we snap our fingers and interest rates go up by 1%, the value of this bond ETF will go down by 2%. If interest rates were to go up 2%, you'd double it. The value of this fund would go down by 4%. If interest rates went up 3%, the value of this fund would go down by 6%. And we could just keep doing it. It's the same math. For each increase of 1 percentage point, the value of the fund goes down by 1% equal to its duration. And by the way, the reverse is true as well. If interest rates were to go down 1%, the value of the fund would go up 2%. Okay? Now, what that means is, if you've probably figured this out, the longer the duration of a fund, the more sensitive it is to interest rates. So if the duration on this fund were not 2 years, but 10 years, well, if interest rates go up by 1%, the value of this fund goes down by 10%. Big difference. So if you want to know what exposure you have to the risk of rising interest rates, check out the duration of your bond funds. I tend to keep mine at an intermediate level, which for me is roughly around 5 years. I certainly don't invest in long-term bond funds, at least not right now with interest rates so low. But whatever your view is on all of that, the key is to understand duration and how you can use that to figure out the potential change in value of your bond investments as interest rates go up or down. Now, something to keep in mind, interest rates aren't the only thing that affect the value of a bond fund. Credit risk does as well. Now, not so much for U.S. government bonds because they're usually viewed as risk-free. We know that's not going to stay the case forever, right? I mean, nations rise and fall. They have throughout history of the world, but right now, and at least for the foreseeable future, U.S. government bonds are viewed as effectively risk-free. That is to say, there's virtually no credit risk or risk of default. But when you get into corporate bonds, even investment-grade corporate bonds, you could have changes in the value of funds based on the risk of default or credit risk. That's certainly true with junk bond or what are called high-yield bond funds. That's certainly true with municipal bond funds that invest in local governments or schools or hospital kind of bond issues. If you read in the news, Puerto Rico issued some bonds not too long ago, and they're viewed as more of a credit risk. So the yields on those bonds were higher than, say, compared to a U.S. government bond. But as the credit risk of Puerto Rico rises or falls, the value of the bond funds could change. So we're only focused on interest rate risk, but it's a pretty significant risk right now. So anyway, if you want to know how sensitive your bond funds are to the rise or fall of interest rates, just check out the fund's duration. There you go. If you have any questions about that, don't hesitate to shoot me an email at dr@DoughRoller.net. You'll find the show notes to this podcast at DoughRoller.net/podcast 56. And I should say one thing that I've been doing, I get all of these podcasts now transcribed. And what I do is include the main topic of the day in an article on DoughRoller that includes the podcast. So if you go to DoughRoller.net/podcast 56, what you will see is a discussion of the 7 ways to budget like a Zen master. Then what I do for the money tool of the day and the money tip of the day, typically I will include those as separate posts, usually the same week, on DoughRoller. So look for those if you want to get more details on the money tool or money tip of the day. I don't always turn them into individual articles if they're just really short and quick and whatnot. But like for today, I kind of went into some detail on Manila. I went into some detail on a bond fund's duration. I'll turn both of those into separate posts so you can check those out as well. Again, as always, shoot me an email at dr@doughroller.net. And remember, until next time, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.